Okay, hey everyone, we've got a market update. I'm with Steve Newen with Hackman Financial and Justin Eep here with Ruoff Mortgage, and they're going to break it down for us, but Steve's going to get us started.
Yeah, obviously, each month we kind of watch closely as to what's going on, primarily with the inflationary numbers. And CPI came back lower than it was the month before, which is always good. It came back at 4.0. The month before in April, it measured at 4.9%. The Feds always have spoken to a target of 2 to 3%. That's what it used to be back in the day. Mike, if you go back to our original podcast in August and it was running in the 8.5 area, and you were wondering, is that good, bad? How do we get this under control? Well, this is an example almost a year later of what's happening. So interest rates continue to climb, set by the Feds themselves to offset inflation, and that's what we've gotten. So we've gotten pretty good. I mean, obviously, if you take the cycles of raising interest rates, it's been 10 interest rate raises for the last 11 months. So in reality, it's one of the steepest climbs you'll find in history of inflationary fights with interest rate climbs. So the increases we've taken on over the time period have been pretty significant. I mean, if you look at the actual basis points, it's 500 basis points, which in our world is basically 5%. From a 0% interest rate. So the good news is inflation is showing signs of being under control. The downside of yesterday's meeting, which we were all kind of waiting to hear, is a very hawkish, what they call hawkish position by the Feds, which means, we're going to pause, which is the first step into the turn of what we want, which is a lowering of interest rate environment for consumers, for debts, for all things, and including our government, by the way. Our government pays the same interest rate. So we really want it to go to a decreasing interest rate environment, but we're not quite there. But the first step to getting there is a pause. And so yesterday, Chairman Powell did announce that they are going to pause interest rate increases for this month. But he did also speak, and then also the committee spoke about the interest rates still being a weapon, so to speak, or a tool that they will continue to use if they need to. So it wasn't a very warm feeling from the Fed meeting, but it was a positive standpoint that there is a pause. So that's what we have. The PPI numbers, which is the producer price index, was also lower than expected to a 2.8% number, which it was 3.3. And that's probably the primary number that the Feds look at, to be perfectly honest with you. CPI, they look at some, but to be honest, PPI is probably their biggest component to consider.
Okay,
and
so hang on, Steve. We've got, let's break it down. A PPI and a CPI.
Yep.
What are those?
Well, the CPI is consumer price index, which is what we consumers pay, and the measurement of food, gas, everything that we pay. And the PPI is producer price index, which is basically the wholesale side of it. So the producers pricing what they need for goods and those types of things to create their goods. So producers, what they pay in terms of getting things together.
Thank you for that.
Yep, no problem. So long and the short of it, it is a positive because we did pause. So that's a good sign. But
have we had any pauses? Is this the first pause?
This is the first pause in basically 11 months.
First pause in 11 months. Got it.
Yeah. And if you recall, the last time we talked about this, we were hoping for a pause sometime soon.
Yeah.
And that's what we finally arrived to. And the pause is the first step into the other side of the coin, which is decreasing the interest rates, which will help the economy. So I think that's the first part of it. The second part of this is this discussion about recession. I think people are concerned about recession. Quite frankly, we probably are already in a recession. We just don't know it because it's measured backward looking. Everything else is kind of measured forward looking in terms of economic concerns and those types of things. But one of the things that recession is kind of funny is it's backward looking. So we don't know until we are actually past the months if we're in a recession. And it's nothing more than a negative number in GDP growth. So in 2 months in a row, result in what's called a recession. So we could be in a recession. We don't know it. Some economic folks think we actually are. but we will find out.
Gotcha. Well, Justin, what does that mean for our industry?
Well, so yesterday when the news came out, we've actually just go backwards a little bit. This week's been really good for mortgage rates. We've seen some positive gains. I guess gains meaning, they've gone back down a little bit this week. When that news came out yesterday, it kind of plateaued. We saw positive gains in the morning. Pretty good pricing in the morning. Afternoon was pretty much plateaued. Like Steve said, a lot of there. I bet if you asked 10 different financial analysts, they'd probably tell you 10 different opinions on what's going to happen from here. So a big mixed bag, I guess, kind of caused us to plateau a little bit yesterday. Now this morning, just kind of looking at it right now, actually, we're kind of back down to that pricing we saw yesterday morning. So kind of plateaued and went back down to that pricing we saw yesterday
Which
morning.
Which is what?
So 30-year rate's going to run you somewhere in the mid sixes, maybe slightly above that. Yeah. And I guess on that note, I do want to say something about being, recession, right? A lot of questions we're getting right now is, okay, people are hearing that we're in a recession, whether we feel it or not. Maybe you haven't, everybody kind of backtracks to 2008. Like they know all these people that lost their jobs, all this stuff. That's what they have in their head as a recession, right? Like that bad. And they're like, well, I don't want to buy this house. And then, and the recession gets worse and I lose 20% of my equity. Well, it's like, well, in reality, if you go back in history, housing prices have, other than 2008, which was a complete outlier, there was only one other recession that we went through where you actually saw housing prices regress. Mm-hmm. We've actually seen some gains in past recessions as far as actual appreciation for houses. Right. So just because a recession doesn't mean a pullback in home prices by any means. Actually, the data would tell you to the contrary to that, other than the outlier in 2008, which, you kind of go back, right? Who's buying houses right now? Mostly millennials. Well, what did they live through, right? Well, they lived through 2008. They saw their parents losing equity, things like that. That's the most fresh memory in their head as far as living through an actual, recession. So we're getting a lot of those questions right now. And then obviously everybody wants to know where rates are going. As soon as I say something, it's going to complete opposite's going to happen. Because I remember it was just me and you, Mike, and we had a conversation. I'm like, we're seeing some positive movements, and then like literally the next week they spiked again. So I'm like, I won't paint myself into that corner, but I do think that at least I think there's going to be a pretty good plateau here, probably until we hear something else in a month. You might see some minimal, declines in interest rate. It's not going to be like we're going to be where we're at now, and we're going to be in the 5s next month or by August. I don't see that. But yeah, that's kind of where we're at, and that's kind of what we're trying to educate people on right now. It's like if you're waiting for 5, you're going to be waiting for another couple. It could be another couple years before we see something like that. So,
gotcha.
Justin brings up a couple of good points there that probably is worth noting. We're going into an election year too, so reporting is going to be pretty strong, right? Yeah. So in other words, the negatives will be very negatives.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
So to Justin's point, if we only think about recession, the worst case scenario that we've ever thought about, which was 2008, which was a very complicated and convoluted environment that has nothing to do with where we are today. Yeah. Yet people will kind of go back and remember that as if that's what's going to happen. And to Justin's point, we have to keep our perspective that you're going to get a lot of negative media reporting automatically because we're in an election year. Yeah. So we have to kind of keep our wherewithal about ourselves and understand that these cycles are actually pretty normal and they occur pretty often, but we don't remember them occurring because sometimes it doesn't affect Main Street like we think it will.
Right.
And so even to Justin's point too, the discussion of recession, everybody who you would ask about recession, everybody feels pretty confident it's not going to be a major recession. It's going to be
Right.
a recession, but it's not going to be one that is like 2008.
Right.